Our government is committed to getting transport back on track by delivering a transport system that boosts productivity and economic growth, enables Kiwis and freight to get where they need to go quickly and safely. In June this year, alongside the Prime Minister, I released the final government policy statement on land transport and reset New Zealand's transport priorities. We've moved away from the previous government's narrow focus on mode shift and slowing people down, and refocus on the core task of building and maintaining our roading network. As you well know, the priorities embedded in the GPS are economic growth and productivity, maintenance and resilience, safety and value for money. These priorities ensure that taxpayers' money is being spent on infrastructure and services that Kiwis rely on, not projects that, which simply are just focused on the previous government's pet light rail focus. It's been quite a year in the transport space. The network we inherited was in a bad state, and this was compounded by a convoluted mix of policies as well as increased regulation and compliance costs. And from day one, we've been working on addressing these issues. In response to a change of direction in GPS 2024, the NZTA has released the National Land Transport Program for 24-27. Delivers record investment for New Zealanders across both public transport and roading. Central to this is a focus on both new infrastructure, finding efficiencies to maintain the assets we already have. The National Land Transport Program brings back the previous national government's successful Roads of National Significance program, 17 priority projects to boost economic growth and improve safety across the country. NZTA is moving at pace on these projects. In the next 3 years, procurement, enabling works and construction is expected to start on the first 7 new RONs: Belfast to Pegasus, Hawke's Bay Expressway, State Highway 1 Cambridge to Powderdy, State Highway 29 Tauriko, Takitimi Northern Link Stage 2, Mill Road and Warkworth to Wellsford. On Saturday, I visited the Hawke's Bay Expressway, which is the first new RONs where work has kicked off four-laning this critically important road in Hawke's Bay. Starting work now allows NZTA to maximise the 25-26 construction season and bring forward the construction of this project by 12 to 15 months. Delivery was a key theme of the previous National Government's RONs program. It's what's got us the Christchurch Southern Motorway, Kapiti Expressway, Puhoi to Warkworth RONs, which was opened by the same people that dismissed it as a, quote, holiday highway. The reality is if you don't have delivery, all you have is a stack of expensive glossy documents. And that is why we are focused on moving at pace for the next generation of roads of national significance. At the same time, we know that the need for increased maintenance on our roading network. That's why the National Land Transport Program boosts funding for pothole prevention by 91% state highways, 50% on our local roads. Unlike maintenance funding in the 2021 NLTP, this funding we ring-fenced resealing, rehabilitation and drainage maintenance work, focusing on preventing potholes rather than being spread across a wide range of activities. As part of this, a record 285 kilometres of lane rehabilitation work will be completed over the coming summer months, a 124% increase compared to last year. In addition to the significant investment being made in our road network, the NLTP delivers over $3.7 billion to improve public transport, 4 major public transport projects being prioritised in our main centres. It's worth emphasising that under our government, the NLTP has delivered a record $6.4 billion towards public transport services and infrastructure across the country. And this is going to make a huge difference in helping people in our most congested cities have other choices around how they get around. This is the largest amount of funding that's ever been delivered for public transport in New Zealand. There's a lot of work underway to get transport back on track, and I encourage all members to get behind this work so we can rebuild the infrastructure pipeline, grow our economy and get people where they need to go quickly and safely. With that, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Julianne, primary.
So primary, yeah. Minister, you stated, and the GPS says that economic productivity and value for money are a priority for this government. How will the government be certain that the projects it's investing in are best value for money? Will there be a minimum BCR on the roads of national significance? What specifically will be the measure of value for money? How will you know the billions of dollars you're planning to spend on your 17 priority projects are actually going to improve economic productivity?
Well, there's a range of factors which the board will take into account when they make those decisions around investing in those in that roading infrastructure. Obviously, the benefit cost ratio will be one thing they look at. The opportunity to unlock land for housing and for industrial growth will be other factors that they take into account. And the efficiency of the network. So there'll be a range of factors that the board takes into account, as it has in the past, in terms of the investments that it makes, in terms of unlocking economic growth, productivity, housing growth, those key outcomes that we've outlined in the government policy statement on transport. And those are matters that the board will need to take into account when weighing up investment decisions at the board.
If there were other ways that were clearly going to achieve greater benefits at lower cost in the same area, would the government be open to that? Like, for example, a 2+1 road through a rural area or investment in public transport in a city?
Well, I think if you look at the GPS, there's a range of different funds, and we obviously, roading is a big part of what we're trying to do. We're getting back to basics, building and maintaining our roading network. The roads of national significance are about those key connections to help unlock economic growth and productivity across the country. But look, the board has to make those decisions around the scope and the projects which they are delivering upon. And, there's, as I said, a record investment in public transport services and infrastructure in this GPS, in this National Land Transport Program as well, $6.4 billion. I think it's $1.4 billion more than what was allocated under the previous NLTP by the previous Labor government. So, the board will be making those decisions. Also, as I mentioned, time of use charging, we'll be looking at how do we maximise the efficiency of our existing networks, where those networks are congested, where there isn't necessarily the capacity to build additional infrastructure. The investment in the City Rail Link in Auckland, completing that is going to make a huge difference in Auckland. So there's a range of investments in the National Land Transport Program and in the GPS across a range of modes.
So Julian,
Help
you've got one more
unlock
sup.
economic growth and productivity.
You've got one more sup and then Tom's got a sup.
It's hard to know what to focus on there, but I mean, specifically the increase to public transport funding, is that just a headline number or is that accounting for inflation? When you account for inflation, is there actually an increase to public transport funding compared to the previous NLTAP?
Well, it's a $1.4 billion increase.
No, but when you account for inflation
And ultimately, it's actually
over 3 years, is it an
well,
increase?
it's a 41% increase in the public transport.
Is it an increase when you account for inflation?
Julianne, can we get an answer? Let's get the answer
I
tight.
believe there's a 41% increase in public transport services funding, which is above the rate of inflation over the last 3 years, the inflation caused by the last government. And so what we are doing is we're funding those services to make sure we can grow patronage in those communities. And so we are investing across a range of modes, a record investment in public transport services in New Zealand, which is going to make a huge difference.
How will putting up fares
Julianne, I'm going to Tom for the next subject.
Yeah, thank you. Minister, public transport such as buses, for example, do they travel on roads?
They do travel on roads last time I looked.
Yeah, and so is it important that things like roads of national significance and investment in public transport and having a reliable roading network is important so that things like private and also public transport can be utilised on those roads?
Totally. I think that's something we obviously need to continue to invest in, is good roading infrastructure, which is not only for people travelling to work in their car, but also taking public transport. And that's certainly the focus this government's focused on, and you've got to maintain it at the same time.
Okay.
If there's a lower cost way.
Julianne, I'm going to go to a new primary.
Yeah, no.
New primary, because you're expanding where you started quite a long way from the original.
Mainly in response to the minister's answers, but
Julianne.
just to what extent is the government receiving advice on the impact of overall freight costs and productivity of different options for replacing the ferries?
Well, really, the ferries are there to ensure a safe and resilient connection. 4 of the 5 current ferries are non-rail enabled. And last time I looked, there's a range of freight operators who use both Inter-Islander and the alternative in order to move their freight between the North and South Islands. So if you look at, that is obviously one of the factors as part of the conversation and decisions we made in due course.
Do you think that like having one rail enabled ferry is the same as having no rail enabled ferries?
No, because 1 is greater than 0.
And
that's just new.
Yeah, so if there was no rail enabled ferries.
However,
As Minister of Transport, is he concerned about impacts on the roading network and overall freight handling costs of having 0 option for rail freight traveling between the North and South Island?
look, ultimately, freight operators make decisions around how they move their freight across the country. Some use rail, some use trucks, some use a mixture of both, some use coastal shipping. There's a range of different options that are available to freight operators. What they're focused on is what's the most efficient way to move it And there's a range of ways in which they do that. And so, I'm, as Minister of Transport, my focus is making sure that there's, an efficient movement of freight across the country. And there's a range of options in terms of how that's done.
Yeah, and so the options
last one was-
available to the freight operators are influenced by decisions the government makes in investment in infrastructure. To what extent is his government considering those overall impacts on freight costs of not having a rail-enabled ferry for New Zealand?
Well, I think regardless, the point is there's going to be a need to be investment in both rail and roading infrastructure, and that's what you see in the GPS and in the National Land Transport Program.
Thank you very much, and we're bang on 9 o'clock. Really
Thank you.
appreciate the time and the free and frank answers.